Hello everyone, this is Tom Uren. I'm here with the Grugq and another Between Two Nerds discussion. G'day Grugq, how are you?
G'day Tom, fine and yourself?
I'm very well. This week's edition is brought to you by Socket. Socket helps developers manage all their supply chain dependencies, their code dependencies to make projects secure. Find them at socket.dev. So this week, Google released a new AI threat report. It went through basically the adversaries or cyber criminals, threat actors are using AI at pretty much every step in the cyber criminal life cycle. So way back in November, which is a lifetime ago in terms of AI, there was a similar report by Anthropic, and they said they had discovered a Chinese threat actor who was using Claude to organize I guess it was a campaign, but it was like Claude was doing all the grunt work, and it would basically come back to whoever was in charge and say, here's what I found. Do you want me to go back out? It was like the worker bees and management was sitting back, seeing the results of Claude. And at that time, I wrote that AI-powered cyber espionage will favor China. I think that was maybe that was the title of my piece. And that was because if you're going to YOLO it, at the time it seemed like, AI would be great for that. You can get a lot more done, but the risks are higher. And that seemed to suit some
people with a high risk appetite.
That's right.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and my thinking was this is something that an organization like NSA or ASD or the Five Eyes won't do because they want to get things right, not screw up and get outed. There's a very high premium on correctness.
Right.
So not that long ago, I had an sponsor interview with Dan Guido, who's CEO of Trail of Bits, which is a sort of specialist consulting cybersecurity company, perhaps would be one way to describe them. And he was talking about how they were using AI, and in fact, it was to add a lot more robustness to processes, to actually make them more secure. And this is my take anyway. The way that they were doing that was breaking down longer chains of work into smaller processes that you could you could be very confident that a machine would do it correctly, because it wasn't go and write me some malware. It was do this little thing and then we'll have a check that it's right or wrong. And so an example, they were using it to write test cases that they'd never written before because it was like just way too much work.
Dull.
Yeah. And it struck me that if you can use it to do test cases, well, you're in a better position, right? Because you never had them before. Even if it somehow manages to stuff up, well, you've not lost anything. So that seemed like a win. I'm sure Dan's take is more sophisticated than mine, but that was my
more nuanced. I'm sure there's probably a lot more going on than
that was my take.
We're leading the charge, and we have AI write tests. That's our value add right there. So I suspect that there's more going on, but I don't think that that's wrong. Like I think that that's probably where AI adds the most value right now, given the state. Yeah. Like it's that sort of thing. Yeah. So I was. So I'm starting to come around to the idea that even the cyber behemoths, cyber giants like NSA will benefit from AI, and it's because they already have processes where a bigger job is broken down into lots of different tasks. And a while back, you sent me a kind of job breakdown of. I think it was it a cyber exploitation role? Yeah, so it was, as I recall, I was looking for the military occupation specialty number of an offensive cyber operator. Right. Probably because I just wanted to make a joke on Twitter, and I thought it would be good to have that specific detail. And I ended up stumbling across this website which listed all of the roles, and then it went into like the core skills, the core knowledge, the abilities that you need to have for each of the sort of subsets that they had within offensive cyber. And so I saved that because that was very, very interesting.
Yeah. So in my file system, you must have sent that to me in 2024, which is like so long ago in AI terms. And the document's got, what is that? 7 different roles. And each of those roles has, skills, abilities, and tasks. So they've spent a lot of time coming up with these lists.
Yeah, to be fair, some of them are like ability to think critically.
Yep.
Ability to evaluate information for reliability, validity, and relevance.
Yep.
It's the very army thing of taking like stuff that is implicitly obvious and writing it as like this is a critical thing that you need to do.
Yeah. So what was interesting about the list, looking at it today, is that those abilities, many of them were things that I thought I would not trust an AI to do today.
Right.
And a lot of
critically, for example, just to pick one.
But there's a whole list of knowledge requirements, I guess. And so for this one, what is that? That's like 50 different dot points for the cyber operations planner. And looking at those, for example, knowledge of computer networking concepts and protocols, knowledge of risk management processes, yada, 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 yada. I thought, I would actually think an AI could maybe not understand it, but compellingly regurgitate those principles in a way that it makes you think that it understands them.
Yeah, so my take on that is actually, if I were in that role, I would want an AI to just double check my work to see if I missed anything.
Right, yep.
Right, if I'm doing a risk assessment and I think I've covered all my bases, I would say, Claude, do a risk assessment with these parameters, blah, blah, blah. And then once that comes back, I say, Claude, given these 2 risk assessments, compare and contrast. And I'd see, like, did it come up with an angle I hadn't thought of? Or did I have a comprehensive thing? Because it's basically free, right? And maybe you get something out of it. And if you don't, you've lost nothing. So that's how I would see it being valuable. But I wouldn't. I think we agree on this. I wouldn't say, Claude, do the risk assessment and then turn that in. Right? Like that's
yes. I think there's a question about how good it gets and whether you would get it to do the risk assessment and then say, okay, have you missed anything? Or do it the other way around.
Right.
Yeah, and so there's the knowledge where it seemed, okay, yes, you train a computer on all of human knowledge and it will have knowledge. The skills and abilities I'm less convinced about. But you can see when you break it down into all these different tasks, there were lots of small tasks where I think AI could be helpful. And it's certainly within the capability of intelligence agencies to get models that are private, like self-hosted models, right? So, for example, there's a recent blow-up between Anthropic and the US Department of, I still call it Defense.
Yes.
Because Anthropic said they wanted to place limits on what you could do, which to me actually sounded pretty reasonable. Like you couldn't surveil American citizens, and I think the other one was you couldn't use AI to launch lethal attacks all by itself.
This is absolutely outrageous. I mean, they're just hampering the ability of the U.S. to defend itself in this complex, ever-changing threat landscape of I mean, come on. That's
part of that blow up. The DoD wanted to label Anthropic with some really punitive label, which was like supply chain risk or something like that.
Which means that no element of the DoD supply chain can use Anthropic.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a transitive property, so it would basically freeze them out of the entire defense contractor.
Yeah. But in that argument, it came out that I think it was Claude, but I don't know if that was the label they used it, but some Anthropic product was used in the raid on Maduro, or the raid to capture Maduro. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, plan a Delta strike to kidnap a world leader. Make no mistakes.
Use the discombobulator. Maybe that's why the discombobulator was used. Claude just said, yeah, and we'll deploy the discombobulator. What's that? I don't know. What?
See, I'm going to tell you one of the reasons why I wouldn't trust Claude to do some of these tasks, because I took that cyber roles list that we had, and I pasted it into Claude, and I said, which one of these would be best for AI versus worst for AI? And it came back and said, the 6 roles are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
So one of the roles I actually do think makes a fair bit of sense for AI, though.
The 6 roles are
cyber operations planner, exploitation analyst, mission assessment specialist, partner integration planner, target developer, target network analyst, and the 7th missing role is warning analyst.
The 7 of 6 is warning analyst. Right. It just sort of right off the bat, anything with the word planner in it is just, it's bad for AI, because these are things where you want a human to be making human judgments. Like this is very much like weighing up the balance of risks plus everything I know, plus like the political pressures that we're under, and like all of these other dynamics. What makes sense for us to do given where we are right now?
I think that planning is an inherently political process, and to understand the political pressures, you need to be a person, because that's what people do.
So like there's that, but then there's the things that we tend to forget about because they're just such boring roles. What they have here as warning analyst,
right? Yep.
Like that is it's absolutely vital, and it's absolutely dull, right? It's where you,
so the sort of potted description develops unique cyber indicators to maintain constant awareness of the status of the highly dynamic operating environment, collects, processes, analyzes, and disseminates cyber warning assessments. So that is a very like cyber-focused description. But for something like the Maduro operation, you can imagine there's a kind of less narrowly cyber, but exactly the same job.
Right. And so what you're looking for is basically, from a cyber role, what you'd be looking for is indications that you're about to get burned.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, what we saw when we were looking at the Chinese report of those NSA operations, how every time a file was modified on disk, that the NSA operators would then go in and try and understand why.
Yeah.
Why did the environment change? What was the reason behind it? Is it that, like, did they do a forensics image of the disk and then start it up again? Did they install, like, antivirus now? Or, are there other indicators that the environment has changed in a way that's more hostile to us, and it could indicate we're about to be discovered? So that's the sort of, like, vital role that you need, but it's also not the most exciting role you can imagine. Right, like monitoring email, monitoring traffic, like it's...
Some of the abilities in the job description are ability to think like threat actors. So I guess there's the sort of surface, I guess I would call it the tactical warning analyst, where you're looking at what's coming in right now and you're making a decision right now about what does that mean? Is the operation blown? And you're sort of just alerting someone else to make a decision about what to do about that. And then I think there's a kind of deeper, what would tell us that we've been pinged?
Right.
Like what are the, the indicators that we need, what do we need to look for in the first place?
That would be indicators that they are looking for us.
Yeah. Right? So I could see like something like Claude would be very good at what's happening right now.
Right.
Based on what we already know, what does that mean? And they would, it would probably do that faster and more reliably than a person would, because
and could do it 24/7 without a problem. Right.
Yeah.
But to me, what that means is that it means that the human in that role can now do more and a more refined task because they don't have to waste cycles
Yep.
on the grunt work part. They can have Claude do that, and they can focus on the thinking like the other side, and then trying to figure out what would be an indication that they're doing something, which would be
And I think obviously you'd say to Claude or whatever AI, what would be the indicators, and you'd look at that and you'd sort of, did Claude get it right, and is there anything else?
Yeah.
Or I think it would be a good baseline, but there's not.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't rely on it solely, I suppose.
No.
But I guess the point of this discussion is that even in somewhere like NSA, there's a role for it, and they will be using it. I'm assuming.
Yeah, and similarly, the target network analyst.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a role I would have thought would be broken out, but apparently they have. And so my understanding is that once you get access to a network, like once you've made your initial breach or whatever, this person would then go in and look around and try and figure out what the best path forward is.
Right.
In order for us to get to the juicy data that we want, there's network segmentation that we need to defeat. But based on this, we can get access to the admin LAN by going through this particular box. So how can we get on that box? Well, and so they sort of plan out, like, given the environment that we're in and the goals that we have, our objectives, how can we do that? And to a degree, that's part of that is like just path mapping, but also part of it is looking at what's vulnerable compared to the exploits that you have or the capabilities that you have on hand. And that's very much just a database lookup against two things, which, again, AI would be pretty good at.
Right. It seems a bit to me like kind of like a Google Maps, except for getting around a network with different parameters or whatever.
Yeah, pretty much. And again, it's the sort of thing I think that, like, the way I'm seeing it is a lot of these are sort of free to give to AI, because if AI comes back and says, here's a way to do it, you're going to look at it and you're going to say, okay, this is a good path, and then you do it. Or you're going to say, this is not the best path, I'm sure I could find a better one. Mm-hmm. And you're going to look for it, which you would have had to do anyway.
Yep.
Right. And it's basically going to be like, if it finds a good one, you're good. If it finds a bad one, you look anyway. And if it can't find one, you look anyway. And so all you do is you save having to find it the first time, or else you do what you would have done anyway. So
So I guess to contrast a YOLO cyber threat actor, they would probably go, well, find me a path, press
execute.
Button, let's go.
yeah.
And so they will be quicker.
A path and then do it. Yeah.
But maybe riskier as well. Whereas I suppose the real intelligence agency will be faster.
I mean, they're professionals, if we're going to talk about it. I mean, unlike those sort of day trader,
So that the professionals will still get benefits.
Yes.
Just they'll be more cautious about deploying those benefits, or maybe more management oversight is perhaps the way to think about it.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that it's important to sort of see AI here as adding capabilities that will allow one person to do a better job. Right. As opposed to replacing that person. Because, like, from my perspective, all of the roles that AI is good for have a level of grunt work that a human can sort of get bored with and start, like they'll glaze over or whatever. And so I see it as being able to bring like a level of vigilance that you might not get normally.
Right. Yeah. So for defined jobs where there's pretty clear yes or no answer, fantastic.
Right.
But because planning the operations involves decisions about risk that are inherently political or maybe contextual.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say it's there's sort of a lot of implicit assumptions and understandings that sort of go on. Like if your commander is giving you a mission, but you can read his body language and see that like he really doesn't like this. That's the sort of thing that you can incorporate, but you can't explain when you're trying to, like if you're trying to explain to a planner that, his eyes seemed shifty and his body was a little bit, turned inwards. They couldn't experience it in a way, and you couldn't describe it in a way that would convey what's actually happening. So it would just be impossible to give that context. But yeah, also to a degree, it's things like an AI is probably not going to be thinking about your career. Right. And like, very honestly, like, these people, like, it's a job, but it's also a job. Right?
Yep.
Like, they do want promotions, they do want raises, they do want to, like, do other things. So when they look at it and they go like, this is a very, very important thing, I need to make sure it works, you're going to move heaven and earth to make sure it works. Whereas this is something that no one cares about. Maybe you don't put your best effort in and you try and do something that's got a higher profile somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that sort of fundamentally changes what you do to be good at a job. Like, I think if much of the mundane stuff can be done by computers, and I think mundane is the wrong word, in that thinking back, the people I knew who did some of these jobs, there were some that were just head and shoulders above everyone else.
Right.
And they did that by basically knowing a lot of stuff and knowing how to apply it. But it seems that my thinking now is that AI will be able to know a lot of the stuff and be able to apply it. So that's not what will separate the best from the... Or will it? I don't know.
Well, I think that's how it presented, but I think that there's some sort of quality that's ineffable underneath that it shows up as that they know a lot of stuff and they know how to use it. But really there's something else below that
they're just really clever
results
people.
In them. Well, they're smart people, and that means that they learn more stuff and they know how to apply it. But if you take that having to know a lot of stuff in this domain out of their specific job role and allow them to do something slightly above it, they're just going to take that cleverness and apply it to the new role and still be head and shoulders above people. Right.
So it might be something like knowing how to get the best out of the computer rather than...
Right. Yeah. It's probably going to be like knowing a lot of stuff and then guiding the AI to make sure that it's, well, for now at least, it might be, guiding the AI to make sure that it covers everything.
Right. Yep.
Properly. So, like, I'm starting to finish some of my side projects now because I'm using Claude Code. And I find that it helps a lot that I know how to program already, because, like, it'll sometimes make judgments that are completely wrong. Like, it'll say, I'm going to have to do this really, really complicated thing because the toolkit we're using doesn't have, like, menu items. And I'll be like, yes, it does. And then it goes, okay, let me check the docs. Yes, the docs said it does. I'm like, like, wouldn't you have done that the first time? Like, like, why would you just come out and say it doesn't do this before you actually check? But, and then it goes ahead and does it. So that's great. But on the other hand, like, it can do things that I would find super tedious and wouldn't get around to doing. So I could say, like, I want this to have themes. And it says, okay, themes are now implemented.
Right.
And then I go out and I find, like, a palette. And I'm like, okay, so here's Tokyo Night. And it's like, 2 minutes later, it's like, okay, now you can select Tokyo Night theme.
Right.
Like, I would never do that. That's a huge pain in the ass and, like, too much dull work. But, it's the fact that I can think of themes and now have them implemented means that I have a different role than I would have had if I was just doing the development.
Right. One thing I was thinking about is that one of the uses I've heard that other threat actors do is they basically code up malware really quickly. And that to me seems like for a professional outfit, they tend to have long-lasting malware where they put a lot of effort in. And I guess I'm thinking of, like, Russia used the same, the same, like, evolution of malware for 20 years.
Yeah, if you have 20 years of use, does it really matter that much how fast you code it the first time?
That's right. And it seems like they'll put a lot of effort in to make it stealthy and hard to detect and flexible. And so test cases, things like that would help doing that. But you're right, like, the payoff, if you amortize it over a long time, it doesn't matter. Or there may be cases where they'll go, okay, for a particular operation, we want to spin up something new and different that has a different look and feel. And in that case, it'll help them anyway. And so,
Yeah, exactly. So, like, what where I see it being very useful in this specific subset is like for ideal OPSEC, every operation would have its own unique tooling.
Right. Yep.
Now, on the other hand, for actual manageability, that's the last thing you want, because you don't want to have 50 operations with 50 different unique tool sets.
Right.
But if what you could do is have 50 iterations of different strains of implant that each provide effectively the same functionality that you could then feed through 50 different C2s that then come back to an interface that's identical and can do the same stuff, like that would be too much development work to do in-house with your actual developers, because you want them doing other things, not just writing different malware strains for one-shot things. Yeah. But now you could do that, which would mean that it'd be much more difficult to link operations together based on the malware strains that are discovered.
Right,
so that could be...
the rise of AI is actually the death of attribution.
Well, it absolutely could be, right? Like it would... How could you...
Well, it makes technical indicators less useful, perhaps.
Right. So, for example, like when Cobalt Strike was basically... Everyone was just using it. It made identifying who was who from beacons not necessarily impossible, but extremely difficult, because everyone was using the same beacon. Now you're going to have... or you could have a different problem where the same threat actor uses different beacons for every target.
Yep.
I think that could be interesting. Like that could be an interesting way to use it. I don't know if it will be the way that people do use it, but it's certainly it's an opportunity there to increase your OPSEC.
Right.
Maybe it's not practical just yet, but
yeah. So this seems like one example where I've actually changed my mind in a relatively short period of time, from November to February. What's that? 6 months?
Right.
Not
so
even that.
You basically, I mean, you were right the first time, and now the world has changed, and you're right the second time.
I like that. Thanks a lot, Grugq.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Tom.